When I took possession of the house, I didn't expect much. The place wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, affordable, and only 15 minutes from work. I figured it was finally time to have a space of my own. Somewhere I could start fresh, unpack slowly, and maybe even learn what peace feels like. Nothing about that first day felt strange. The house was fine, smelled clean, and the afternoon light hit the living room just right. It felt like a good decision. Moving was tiring, so I took it easy. I didn't even unpack all the boxes that day. Just the basics: clothes, dishes, and a mattress on the floor. I remember ordering takeout, sitting on the kitchen counter, scrolling through my phone while eating straight from the container. It felt normal, quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think maybe, for once, you made the right call. The house wasn't new, but it had character. Slightly uneven floors, old light switches that clicked too loudly, and windows that needed a bit of force to shut. But that's how older homes are. You adjust. I'd been through a breakup a few months before, and this move felt like closure. A new place, new habits, no shared memories in the walls. Just me. I kept telling myself I needed a space where I could breathe again. That's what drew me to this house. It wasn't about luxury, it was about quiet. The landlord seemed fine. Mid-50s, polite, barely said a word when I picked up the keys. He mentioned the place had been empty for a few months. I didn't think much of it. For the first few days, everything went exactly as expected. Work during the day, unpacking in the evening. Every night, I'd cook something simple and fall asleep early, exhausted from lifting boxes and rearranging furniture. The neighborhood was calm, mostly older houses with trimmed lawns and a lot of space between them. You could hear kids playing 2 streets over, dogs barking somewhere far off, and the occasional car rolling by after dark. That's all. Sometimes I'd leave the back door open while I carried boxes from my car. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain. It was peaceful. The first time I noticed anything unusual, it barely registered. I came home from work and found the kitchen light on. I was sure I'd turned it off that morning, but I brushed it off. I was still getting used to the switches and outlets. It could have been anything. I turned it off, made dinner, watched something on my phone, and went to bed. That was it. Just a light. Nothing worth remembering. At least, that's what I thought then. By the 4th day, I'd started to feel settled. My stuff was unpacked, curtains hung, shelves stocked. The place finally started to feel like mine. I even texted a friend, telling them how much I liked it. She said, "Send pictures." So I did. Every room, one by one. I remember hesitating before snapping one of the living rooms. There was nothing wrong with it. It just felt off balance somehow, like something in the frame wasn't matching what I saw in person. But again, I ignored it. Little things started piling up, barely noticeable at first. A chair moved slightly from where I left it. The bathroom door cracked open when I swore I'd shut it tight. I kept telling myself it was me adjusting, or maybe just tiredness. After all, when you move somewhere new, your mind needs time to settle too. But on the 5th night, I woke up around 3 a.m. for water, and as I passed the hallway mirror, something stopped me. It wasn't the reflection. It was the faint sound coming from the living room. Not loud, just movement. Slow. Careful. Like someone shifting their weight to stay quiet. At that point, I still didn't believe anything was wrong. But that sound, that single sound, was the first thread that would slowly start to pull the whole story apart. I stood there for maybe a full minute, just listening. The sound stopped almost as soon as I noticed it. I waited longer than I probably should have, long enough for the silence to start feeling heavier than the noise. When I finally turned the light on, the living room looked exactly the same as it did before I went to bed. Nothing was out of place. No open windows, no unlocked doors. I even checked the back porch just to be sure. The air outside was still, cool, and empty. I went back to bed convincing myself it was the house settling. That's what people always say, right? The next morning felt completely normal again. Sunlight through the blinds, coffee on the stove, quiet neighborhood hum outside. If anything had been wrong, it seemed to have fixed itself overnight. Until I noticed my shoes by the door. One pair, muddy at the bottom, wasn't where I'd left it. They'd been shifted a few inches to the left, soles facing the wall. It was such a small detail that it almost didn't matter. But I knew I hadn't moved them. I actually laughed about it to myself, trying to break the tension. It's easy to make jokes when the lights are on and the coffee's hot. That laughter didn't last long. I spent the rest of that day cleaning. The hallway had a narrow door near the end, one that I hadn't really noticed before. It didn't match the others. It sat lower to the ground and had a newer handle. When I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. I figured it was a small closet or maybe sealed storage. But when I pressed my ear against it, I heard a faint hollow echo on the other side, like a space, bigger than a closet. I made a mental note to ask the landlord about it. That evening, I called him. No answer. I texted, "Hey, what's behind the small door in the hallway?" Delivered. Never read. I sent another later that night. Still nothing. It wasn't until I scrolled through our earlier messages that I realized something odd. When he first sent me the lease documents, the address he listed had a different number, just one digit off from mine. A typo maybe, or maybe not. At that moment, I started to feel like I was missing something important. For the next 2 days, I tried to ignore it. Routine helped. Work, chores, calls with friends. But every night, around the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning, I'd wake up. Always for no reason. And always to the same quiet pressure in the air, like the house was listening for my next move. I started leaving lights on. Just 1 or 2, here and there. I told myself it was for comfort. But really I wanted whoever, or whatever, might be watching to know I was awake. On the 7th day, curiosity finally won. I took a screwdriver and tried to pry open that small hallway door. The screws came loose faster than I expected, as if someone had already done it before. Behind the panel was an empty crawl space, about 4 feet high, stretching toward the end of the house. It smelled faintly like old wood and dust, but there was something else. Footprints, small, smudged, leading inward and fading into the dark. They weren't mine. I turned my phone's flashlight on and pointed it inside. The beam caught a glint of metal, a spoon, then a folded blanket, and finally, a disposable coffee cup, still half full. It wasn't just a storage space. Someone had been living there. Recently. The air felt warm, as if it had been occupied not long ago. I didn't go any further that night. I pushed the panel back, locked my bedroom door, and sat awake until sunrise. Every sound in that house, every creak, every distant hum, felt different now. Because after that discovery, I wasn't asking what I'd been hearing anymore. I was asking who. When the sun finally came up, I still hadn't slept. The crawl space door stayed shut, but I couldn't stop staring at it. It wasn't fear that kept me still. It was disbelief. I wanted to think it was an old setup, maybe left by the previous tenant. But that coffee cup, it was still wet inside, and the blanket looked recently folded. I waited until noon before doing anything. That's when I decided to record a video on my phone. Part of me thought maybe I'd post it later, proof that I wasn't imagining things. I opened the panel again, this time with gloves and a flashlight. I filmed everything. The blanket, the spoon, the footprints. I even said the date and time out loud. When I reached deeper into the crawl space, the air grew warmer. And the flashlight reflected off something else, a glass jar. Inside it was a collection of receipts, wrappers, and a photograph. It was a picture of the living room, my living room, taken from the hallway just a few days earlier. The timestamp in the corner proved it. Someone had taken it after I moved in. I didn't waste time. I went straight outside, locked the door, and called the police. They came within half an hour. The officer who searched the crawl space didn't find anyone, but he found something worse. A small section of the wall that had been cut open behind the insulation. It led into a narrow gap between the inner and outer structure of the house, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. That's how they'd been moving around, between walls. The officer's tone changed after that. He called for backup and asked me to wait outside. They spent nearly 2 hours inside. When they finally came out, one of them looked pale. He said they'd found signs of extended habitation, food containers, bedding, a small flashlight, and beneath all of that, more photos of me, sleeping, cooking, watching TV. Every photo had been taken from behind cracks in the walls, air vents, or door gaps. Some even had timestamps that matched nights I thought I was alone. The police never caught whoever it was. No fingerprints, no direct evidence of entry. It was like they'd vanished the moment I found the crawl space. I moved out the next day. Didn't pack most of my stuff. Just essentials, my phone, and the clothes I had on. The landlord never answered any of my calls after that. I even went by the rental office listed in the paperwork. The building didn't exist. The entire lease, every signature, every receipt was fake. I'd been paying someone who never actually owned the house. And whoever was living in those walls, they knew I was coming. They had time to prepare. Sometimes I still scroll through my phone and look at that first text I sent to my friend. The one where I said, "I think I finally found a place that feels right." I can't help but wonder, how long had they been in there? Did they watch me move in, room by room, waiting to see if I'd notice? I don't even like staying in hotels anymore. Too many vents, too many walls, too many places where someone could hide and wait. And the worst part? I checked the photos again before deleting them. In one of them, just barely visible in the reflection of the TV screen, was the shape of a face. Close. Too close. That's why I'm sharing this. Because you never really know who used to live where you live now, or who never left. If this story made you think twice about the place you sleep in tonight, tell me in the comments. Would you have stayed after finding that crawl space? Or would you have left everything behind like I did? I wasn't planning on buying a house that month. It just kind of happened. The listing came through my email one evening. An old property just outside a small town, about an hour from the city. The photos showed wide wooden floors, big windows, and a wraparound porch that overlooked a maple tree. I remember thinking, it's too cheap. But curiosity won. The realtor's name was Martha. She was friendly, older, and talked in that calm, reassuring way people in real estate always do. She said the owner had passed away quietly, no family, no heirs. The bank just wanted to sell it off. We walked through the place together the next day. It had that smell of dry wood and faint dust, like time had just stopped there. The living room had an old fireplace, untouched for years. The kitchen was small but clean. The bedrooms were simple, plain white walls, thin curtains, the kind that barely move even when the windows open. Everything felt still. I asked her about the structure, wiring, plumbing, foundation. She said it all checked out. When I asked if there was a basement, she smiled politely. There was one, she said, but it was sealed off years ago. It's nothing you need to worry about. I didn't push. Maybe it flooded once. Maybe it was unstable. Either way, I signed the papers that same week. And just like that, I owned my first home. The first few days were perfect. The silence out there felt like peace. No traffic, no neighbors yelling through walls, just the sound of wind through trees. I started unpacking, room by room. The only strange thing I noticed was how cold the floor felt in the hallway, near the back of the house. Even with the heater running, that one spot always stayed cool. At first, I thought maybe it was a draft, but when I checked the vents, they were fine. Then, around the fourth night, I woke up to a low thump. It came from somewhere below me. It wasn't loud, just dull, like something soft had fallen on wood. I got out of bed, turned on the lights, and walked through the house. Nothing. Every door locked. Every window closed. I told myself it was probably pipes or the house settling. That's what people say, right? But the next morning, I noticed something else. The hallway floor, the cold one, had a small line across one of the boards, like a seam. It wasn't a crack, it was too straight for that. Almost like the edge of a trapdoor. When I tapped it, it made a different sound. Hollow. I couldn't stop thinking about it. All day. All night. That line on the floor. The one Martha never mentioned. So, the next afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought a small crowbar. When I came home, I pulled up the rug in that hallway and knelt down. The seam ran about 3 feet across. I slipped the crowbar in gently and pried it up. The plank lifted easier than I expected. Underneath was a small metal ring, the kind used for lifting panels. I hesitated, but I had to know. When I pulled it open, the smell hit first. It wasn't rot. It was older than that, like old paper and something metallic. There was a narrow staircase beneath, leading down into darkness. The air that came out felt colder than the rest of the house. I shined my phone flashlight down. Concrete walls, wooden steps, and at the very bottom, a door. It wasn't a normal door. It looked newer than the house itself, clean, metal hinges, freshly painted white. I called out just to be sure. My voice echoed, but nothing answered. Still, I went down. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing way louder than they should have. When I reached the bottom, I realized something strange. There was no handle on the door, just a keyhole. I turned back up the stairs, but right as I did, I heard something behind that door. A faint shuffle, then silence. I backed away slowly. That door was solid, but I could feel someone, or something, on the other side. I went back upstairs, replaced the plank, and didn't go near that hallway for the rest of the night. But sleep never came. Every time the house settled, I thought it was a step on those stairs. By morning, I decided to call Martha. No answer. Voicemail. I called again. Still nothing. When I checked her office online, the listing was gone. Her number, her company, everything had been taken down. That's when I noticed something on my phone screen. In my camera roll. It was a picture of the hallway, taken from the night before. I never took it, and in that photo, the trapdoor was open. I don't remember much after that. I just remember running. I drove to a motel 2 towns over and stayed there for 3 days. When I finally got the courage to go back with a friend, the hallway was empty. The plank was nailed shut, freshly sealed, almost like it had never been opened. But the rug was gone. I moved out the next week, told the bank I couldn't keep up with payments, and left the keys in the mailbox. I never heard from the realtor again. And every time I drive past that town, I look for the house. But it's not there anymore. Just an empty lot with wild grass and a for sale sign that hasn't been touched in years. If you were me, and you found that hidden staircase in the new house you just moved in, would you have opened it? Or would you have left it buried forever? You ever buy something thinking, this is too good to be true, but you convince yourself it's just your luck? That's pretty much how this started. I'd been renting in the city for years. Tiny apartment, paper-thin walls, upstairs neighbor vacuuming at 2 in the morning. You know the drill. When the rent went up again, I decided I was done paying someone else's mortgage, so I started house hunting. I wasn't looking for much. Just a place outside the city, quiet, something I could actually call my own. Then my realtor sends me a listing. Cute little 2-story house, decent yard, wraparound porch. The price? Way lower than anything I'd seen in that area. I remember calling her right away, thinking it had to be a typo. She laughed and said, "Nope, it's real. Estate sale. The owner passed away and the family just wants it sold." I probably should have thought twice, but at the time, it sounded like a win. Every house I toured before had mold, bad wiring, or neighbors who stared too long from their porch. This one looked perfect. We drove out there on a sunny Saturday. The town was small. One diner, one grocery store, gas station that still had analog pumps. It was the kind of place that made you feel like everyone already knew each other. When we pulled up, the house looked exactly like the photos. White siding, blue shutters, a big oak tree shading the yard. It even had that small-town charm. Wind chimes, faded mailbox, a welcome mat by the door that clearly hadn't been moved in years. Inside, everything was spotless. Fresh paint, polished floors, new appliances. No smell of damp or dust, just the faint scent of lemon cleaner. It didn't feel haunted or eerie. It felt lived in, like someone had just stepped out for groceries. The realtor said the previous owner was an old man named Arthur Kane. He'd lived there for decades, alone, until he passed last winter. The family didn't want to deal with the property, so they handed it to her agency. That's it. No mystery, no warning signs. Just a quiet house in a quiet town. I signed the papers a week later. And on moving day, I stood in the driveway thinking, this might actually be the best decision I've ever made. I had no idea how wrong I was. The first week was great. Quiet neighborhood, nice weather, decent Wi-Fi. What more could I ask for? I spent most of that time unpacking, hanging pictures, and setting up my little home office. It felt good, you know? That sense of, this is mine. But weird stuff started happening early on. Not ghost movie weird. Just small things that made me question myself. Like one morning I walked into the kitchen and found the faucet dripping. I was sure I'd turned it off the night before. Didn't think much of it. The next day I noticed the hallway light on when I woke up. Again, probably me forgetting. New house, new routine, right? But by the end of that week, things got off. One evening I came home from work and the porch light was on. I never turn it on when I leave. It's broad daylight when I head out. Still, maybe I hit the switch by accident that morning. Except the next day, it was on again. And the day after that. So, I checked the wiring. Everything looked fine. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop a little. The light switch itself was flipped up. Meaning, someone physically turned it on. Now, I know what you're thinking. Break-in, right? That's what I thought too. So I called a locksmith, had the locks rekeyed, even put up a cheap security cam by the front door. For a few nights, nothing happened. Then I woke up around 2:30 one morning to a noise. A faint thump. Thump. Like someone moving slowly through the hallway. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. It stopped. I grabbed the bat from beside my bed and crept out. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge downstairs and the tick of the old wall clock. The next morning, I checked the camera footage. Nothing moved outside. No cars, no people, no animals. It was like the world had gone still. But then, I noticed something strange. The porch light. It wasn't on when I went to bed, but in the footage, right around 2:31 a.m., it flickered on. No movement, no trigger. Just click. That's when the first real chill hit me. Because that meant whatever, or whoever, was doing this, was inside. There's one thing I didn't mention earlier. When I bought the house, the realtor said the basement was used mostly for storage. Nothing special. She didn't mention that the door to it locks from the outside. I only noticed that after moving in. It struck me as weird, but I figured maybe the old owner didn't want kids or guests wandering down there. Anyway, one evening, after another round of light switch games, I decided to check the basement. I grabbed a flashlight, because of course, the bulb down there was burnt out, and headed down. The air was damp and cold. Old concrete, dusty shelves, a workbench, some boxes that looked untouched for years, and on the far side, a recliner chair facing an empty spot in the wall, like someone used to sit there every day staring at nothing. I noticed a little table beside it, with a half-empty glass of water. Not new, but not ancient either. I started opening boxes. Old tools, faded newspapers, a stack of letters, all addressed to Arthur Kane. One box was filled with little notes written in the same shaky handwriting. Keep the light on. Don't let them take the house. They'll forget me if it's dark. That's when something clicked. The porch light, the hallway switch, the same exact lights that kept turning on. I froze. Then I heard the softest creak behind me, like a floorboard bending under weight. I turned fast. Nothing there, but the basement door at the top of the stairs was closing. I ran up, heart pounding, slamming into it just before it latched shut. Locked it. And for the first time, I slept with every light in the house on. The next day, I saw my next-door neighbor mowing his lawn. I figured maybe he knew something about the old owner. We chatted over the fence for a bit, small talk, and then I asked, "Hey, did you know Mr. Kane, the guy who used to live here?" He gave me this look, like I'd said something strange, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, Art. He was nice. Bit of a loner though, kept to himself. Loved that house." He paused, then said quietly, he didn't like people touching his lights. That line stuck with me all day. When I got home that night, I decided to leave everything off. No porch light, no hallway light, nothing, just to see what would happen. Around midnight, I woke up to that same sound again. Thump, thump, moving through the hallway. Then, one by one, the lights in the house started turning on. First the hallway, then the living room, then the kitchen. By the time I got up, the whole house was glowing. And then I saw it. Through the window, the porch light, flickering. The bulb burned out seconds later. I stopped sleeping for days after that. Every night felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then one night, I woke up cold. Freezing cold. My bedroom door was open. I never leave it open. From the hallway came a faint creak, then a whisper. Not words, just the sound of breath against air. I tried to move, but it was like the air was thicker than it should have been, like something was standing in the doorway, watching. And then, the voice. Old, soft, almost pleading. "You're in my house." The lights snapped on all at once. Every single one. I grabbed my keys, ran outside, and didn't stop until I hit the street. When I came back the next morning, just to grab my essentials, the porch light was on, but the switch inside, it was off. I sold the place a month later. Didn't even care about the loss. The family that bought it seemed happy enough. But every time I drive past that old street on my way to work, the porch light's still on, even in the middle of the day. If you ever find a house where the lights won't stay off, maybe don't try to fix it. Maybe someone's just trying not to be forgotten. You know how every small town has that one old house people tell stories about? For me, it was the one sitting at the end of Willow Creek Road. The house with the overgrown yard and the crooked for sale sign that hadn't moved in years. I'd just gotten out of a long-term lease in the city and needed a reset. Somewhere quiet, cheap, and away from everything. So when the listing popped up online, 3-bedroom home, newly available, Sold as is. I jumped on it. The realtor sounded surprised when I called. She said, "Oh, you're actually interested in that one?" I laughed. "Yeah. Why? What's the catch?" She hesitated, then said, "It's been empty for a long time. People lose interest once they see it. That should have been my first red flag. When I drove down to check it out, the place looked better than I expected. Sure, the paint was peeling, and the porch sagged a little, but the bones were good. Inside, it smelled like dust and cedar. Old, but not rotting. There were still curtains on the windows. A few pieces of furniture left behind. A dining table, a lamp, a dresser. It almost felt like someone had just walked out one day and never came back. I asked the realtor about that, and she shrugged. It's been vacant since before I started working here. The records say the last owner passed away years ago, but no one ever moved in after. She smiled nervously. Anyway, it's yours if you want it. And just like that, it was mine. No competition, no bidding wars. Just one signature and I had my own house. The first few days were peaceful. I spent my mornings cleaning, airing out rooms, and pulling weeds from the garden. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a beer, listening to the crickets. It felt like the perfect escape from city noise. But after a while, I started hearing things. It wasn't dramatic, just small, domestic sounds that shouldn't exist in an empty house. A door creaking shut somewhere down the hall. The faint click of the stove turned off, even though I hadn't used it. Footsteps, light ones, pacing above me when I was in the kitchen. Now, this is an old house. Wood shifts, pipes moan. I told myself all that. Until one night I came home from work and saw something strange. There was light in the upstairs window. A dim yellow glow, like someone had left a lamp on. I checked every light switch, every outlet. Nothing worked upstairs yet. The electricity hadn't been connected fully in that part of the house. Still, there it was, a faint, flickering glow in the master bedroom window. When I went up to check, it was gone. There was one room I hadn't opened since moving in. A small one near the end of the hall upstairs. The doorknob was rusted shut, so I figured it was just storage. But that night, after the light incident, I decided to try again. I grabbed a screwdriver, popped the old latch, and pushed it open. The air that came out was cold. Not cool, cold. Like a freezer. Inside was a simple bedroom. Wallpaper peeling, floorboards warped. But what caught my attention was the bed. Perfectly made. White sheets, tucked corners, like someone had just left for work. And on the nightstand, a photo. It showed a woman in her late 30s, smiling in that same room. Same wallpaper, same bedspread. Only, there was no dust on the frame. Everything else in the room looked aged, but that picture looked new. I turned it over. On the back, written in faded blue ink, "For whoever finds this, please keep the light on." That night, I dreamed of footsteps pacing the hallway. Not fast, not threatening, just steady, patient. Like someone doing their nightly routine. When I woke up, it was still dark, and that faint sound was real. Tap, tap, tap. I got out of bed, heart racing, and looked toward the hall. A soft glow spilled out from under the door of that locked room. It flickered, steady, then gone, then steady again. I opened the door. Nothing. Just that empty, cold room. Except this time, the photo was gone. I tore the room apart looking for it. Nothing. And then, from behind me, a woman's voice. Quiet, polite, almost curious.
"You saw my picture?"
I turned so fast the flashlight slipped from my hand. It rolled across the floor, throwing wild shadows on the walls. And for half a second, I saw her, standing by the window, pale, wearing the same dress as in the photograph. Not angry, not scary, just sad. And then she was gone. The next morning, I went to the town records office. I told the clerk the address. She frowned, typed something, and said, "That property hasn't been occupied since 1996. I laughed. "That's not possible. I've been living there for weeks." She turned the screen so I could see. There was an old black and white photo of the house, and there she was, the same woman, standing on the porch. Her name was Margaret Lane. She died in that house. No one ever said how. The record just listed it as domestic incident, unresolved. I asked if anyone else had lived there after. The clerk shook her head. "People tried," she said. "Never lasted long. They all said the same thing." "What's that?" I asked. She looked me dead in the eye. She still kept the lights on. When I got back home, it was evening. I parked out front and just sat there staring at the house. Every window was dark, except that one upstairs. The faint yellow glow, the same one from before. I walked in slowly, the floor creaking beneath my feet. No sound, no movement, just the hum of electricity. I climbed the stairs, one step at a time. When I reached the top, the door to her room was open, and on the nightstand, the photo had returned. This time, a new note was taped to it. Fresh ink, different handwriting. "Thank you for keeping me company. You can go now." I left that night. Didn't pack a thing. Didn't even look back. When the realtor called a month later asking why I'd abandoned the property, I told her the truth. And she just sighed and said, "You're not the first." They said no one's lived there for years, but maybe some people never really leave.